As we were made to remember once again by the conference presentation, 1/5 of Descartes' writings pertain to the domain of medicine in the broad sense. And accordingly, most of Descartes' first followers and opponents were indeed physicians or people teaching medicine at the university level. The best known case is without doubt Henricus Regius, the Utrecht professor, but I would like today to consider with you one more case, one more professor in medicine who had a pivotal role, I think, in Descartes' life, and even more importantly, so in the reception of Descartes' philosophy. And I'm referring to Vopiscus Fortunatus Plemp, as you might see from the title of my talk. And what we might realize, I think, by considering the case of Plemp and his, in a way, transition from a friend of Descartes to a foe, was indeed the importance of medicine, even in aspects normally not considered so crucial, such as the condemnation of Descartes' philosophy by the theological faculty. I think, and I will intend to show, that this condemnation was indeed in part an affair of physicians and pertained to the domain of medicine. Just a quick, Plemp was mentioned quite a few times throughout the conference, even before, but just to be sure that we're all on the same page. Vopiscus Fortunatus Plemp was born in Amsterdam. He was trained with the Jesuits. He was a junior contemporary of Descartes. And today I will consider mostly two works by Plemp, the Ophtalmographia and the Fundamenta medicinæ, originally published as the Fundamentis Medicinae, were published time and again by Plemp with more or less modifications. And I think it's really telling to compare the different editions of the two works, and we might learn a lot about how Descartes' philosophy was received throughout the 17th century. And the publication of the different editions of Plemp's works due in today's we have two very important events in Descartes' life: the publication of his first work in 1937, Discours de la méthode, with the essays, meaning, and in particular with the dioptrique, and in 1662, the condemnation of Descartes' philosophy in Leuven, which resulted the following year, the year after that, in Descartes' works being put in the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. After 1638, as you will all know, I don't have to enter the details here, Descartes arranged together with Plemp an exchange about the Discours de la méthode, and in particular concerning the circulation of the blood, which resulted in a most pitiful episode of Descartes' life that I will reconsider in a second. And we will see indeed that throughout his ages, Plemp, you see here two representation of the same guys over in 4 years distance, moved from being a close friend of Descartes, indeed, to be one of his staunchest enemies. Already yesterday, I may remember that Descartes in 1932 was living in Amsterdam, in Kalverstraat, the street of the butchers. And in Amsterdam at the time, he was performing the sections, and there is indeed evidence that he was doing so together with Plemp. And at the same time, Plemp was drafting his first work, which 1 year after that here is an appointment in Leuven. And we do have evidence from both Descartes' side and Plemp that the two guys, Descartes and Plemp, were on especially good terms at the period. Indeed, they were even so close to be friends. And I guess there is indeed evidence in the Ophtalmographia of Descartes' exchange with Plemp at the time. This is speculative, of course, but I do think that the versatissimus quidam opticus, with whom Plemp was speaking about the inversion of the retinal image and how to account for that, for the fact, namely, that we don't perceive things inverse, even though the retinal image is so, is indeed no one else by Descartes. This is a matter of speculation, but the chronology, I think, strongly suggests that this is the case, and the account that Plemp is presenting in the Ophtalmographia will be pretty much in line with the cognitive account that Descartes was to present 5 years later in the dioptrique. What is more sure, on the other hand, I think that, well, Descartes had Plemp in mind at the time he was writing the dioptrique. This is, of course, the safest assumption, as the Ophtalmographia had already been published. And in particular, as you might see here, I'm not gonna read it out loud, what you do find is that according to Plemp, we do perceive things in the proper order, not so much because of our judgment restoring the orientation of the image, but in a way, Plemp is saying, well, look, the brain, the cognitive faculty, is looking at the retinal image from behind and upside down. Therefore, this inversion, determined by the orientation of the cognitive faculty, determines that the image is the orientation of an image is correct. And what I do find here is that I think, and we can have it in a discussion, that when the car in the famous image, even shown before by Thorin, is taking stance against the people who think that we do perceive the images as if the cognitive faculties had yet other eyes, Descartes is, I think, thinking among the others precisely of Plemp and of his particular account of how to account for the reorientation of the retinal image. And as you might see here, indeed, you might see that Plemp is expressly mentioned quod nos in clausa camera imagine, and so forth. And this is, I think, pretty much what Descartes is denouncing in this part of the diatric and in the image. In a way, the guy that you find here is, in a way, a proxy for Plemp. The year after all the publication of the diatric, after the publication of the diatric in June 37, Descartes arranged together with Plemp and his tutor Froment an exchange concerning the Discours de la méthode. In particular, Froment and Plemp divided their task. It was for Plemp to discuss Descartes' account of the blood circulation and the motion of the earth presented in the Discours de la méthode, whereas Froment took stance and discussed Descartes' theory of vision in the diatric and also the meteor. Something which is truly important to notice, I think, and to realize is that half of Froment's objections to the car pertain to the domain of neurophysiology. You do have Froment discussing two kind of complex works by Descartes, both the diatric and the meteor, as I was saying, but Froment in his objections in coming time and again back to Descartes' understanding of how the nerves work, and in particular how this account of the nerves relate to his account of the perceptual process. The first passage concerning how to account for the location of pain was already discussed yesterday by Annie Bigot-Espérier. I'm not going to read it once again, but you do see in the second passage, for example, that Froment is taking issues with Descartes' account of how we can perceive colors and how it can be that the only differences occurring that determine a different perception of different colors results from nothing but from a different local motion in the nerves. What you do find here in particular is that even a professor of Holy Scripture, a professor of theology like Froment, perceive as the most, in a way, innovative and problematic parts of Descartes' philosophy as presented in the diatric, precisely his account of physiology and anatomy. In a way, even the professor in theology, such as Froment, found that the most innovative part in Descartes' philosophy was coming, at least from this, at least as presented in the Discours, from the diatric and the medical tradition. And you do find that this particular understanding of Descartes' philosophy has been chiefly, or at least the most important part of Descartes' philosophy, innovative one, was the theory of perception and the neurophysiology, stayed there, at least in the University of Leuven, for over 30 years, and was endorsed by both Descartes' supporters and opponents. I cannot enter here the details. We do have evidence that Descartes' philosophy started being taught at Leuven University around 48, and I guess mostly as a result of the appointment one and a half year before by Gerard van Gutshoven, that is mostly remembered among Cartesians for the illustrations he provided of Descartes' Traité de l'Homme, which was published only in 62 by Charles, in 64 by Claire Cellier, but was already circulating in manuscript copies. What you do find, I think, and it's really relevant to the topic of this conference, meaning the importance of medicine for Descartes' philosophy and his reception, is indeed that in one university, which was famous for being the stronghold or theological thinking and Catholic philosophy, in a way, the debate concerning Descartes' philosophy was about very different issues, not so much demonstration of God existing, not so much the theory of the passion on anything that presented in the principles specifically, but about medicine, as I was saying before, the physiology of vision. You do find strong support that this is indeed a claim if you consider how Descartes' philosophy was taught at the time and what was going on in the classroom at the University of Leuven. Unfortunately, we lost most of the materials because of a devastating fire in the First World War, but the few scattered evidence that we have suggests a very strong, goes in the very same direction. It was not only for Mont to see the physiology of Descartes as being one of the most important part of his philosophy, but also the supporters. And in particular, you do find evidence from this very splendid disputation published by, defended under Gerard van Gutschoven, brother Willem van Gutschoven, which is indeed which is strongly Cartesian. You do see it from every single proposition, mostly of the disputatio. You do find at the beginning, for example, very clear the denounce of occult qualities and so forth, and the proud statement, nobis materia et motus sufficient. For as Cartesian, it's enough, matter and motion are enough to account for all physical phenomena, and indeed also for all phenomena of the living beings, of the ingeniosa viventium machina. And as you might see pretty clearly here, there is the idea that you can explain as a Cartesian all of mental fact, living and biological phenomena without appealing to nothing but motion, nothing's none of these facultates pulsificae defended by people like Harvey and Lem. And once again, you do find, as in Formon, very clearly stated as one of the most important contention of the new philosophy, the idea that the soul is only responsive to the changes occurring in the brain, or in the motto, in solo cerebro sensimus, which you have, the only sensations which you have are in the brains. And this insistence on the neurophysiology is defended and articulated time and again throughout the entire disputation, and where you do find at the very end explicitly mentioned the name of the car. All of these propositions, in case you are a little bit familiar, you might realize that they come straight from the dioptric, or even more pertinently from the Specimina Philosophiae, which is to say the Latin translation of the Cart's dioptric as done in 1644. This insistence on the neurophysiology, on Descartes' neurophysiology, as one of the most important aspects and claims of the new philosophy, was defended not only disputations and so forth, but this was exactly how professors in Leuven University, the one in particular of philosophy, distinguished the new philosophy, the philosophy of the recensiores, as compared to the peripatetics. We cannot go through the text. There are many things that could be quoted here. I've just provided one sample. You do find very clear here presented that the crucial difference between the Aristotelian and the new Cartesians, but was indeed about the theory of perception, and was indeed, once again, the claim that we have seen in Formon's attack of Descartes' discourse, the claim, namely that omnis sensatio fiat in cerebro, the claim that in a way the soul isn't informing the entire body, but it's only located in the brain, and even more specifically so in the infamous pineal gland. This theory of perception, and in general Descartes' philosophy, was strongly attacked at the time. You may remember that Descartes' philosophy was denounced and it was condemned in Utrecht in 1942. It was condemned in Leiden 5 years after that. And Plemp, the already mentioned Plemp, started already from the early 50s to try to have Descartes condemned in his university. And one extraordinary document of this attack and opposition to Descartes' philosophy, is it isn't much known, unfortunately, are these Judicia de Philosophia Cartesiana. And what you might see here, indeed, is that there was a professor in medicine, namely Plemp, leading an entire group of professors in philosophy in trying to have Descartes' philosophy condemned. But surprisingly enough, the theological issues aren't prominent in this attack. You don't find the issue of transubstantiation never mentioned by Formon, and only briefly by Plemp. What Plemp and Formon found most problematic in Descartes' philosophy was indeed, once again, his account of perception. His account in particular of the visual process, and this, I think, mostly because of its philosophical consequences. If I am right, I think that Descartes' account of perception as presented in the Dioptrique wasn't just intended to account for how we perceive color, shapes, and so forth, but even more so, it was intended to provide an argument to deny the existence of real qualities in external bodies, and so forth. And this is, I think, the reason why Descartes' neurophysiology came to the fore in these debates, not so much for topics related to Vesalius, but for his far-reaching implication. And in particular, Descartes' philosophy was tagged on account, based on Descartes' own life. The fact that Descartes had died so young, only 54, was expressly used by Plemp in order to attack the utility and indeed the truth of his entire account of the human body. And you might see in the first line of the slide, which is something that I find pretty nasty to say to someone who you consider wants to be a friend. Plemp, after Descartes' death, just 4 years after Descartes' death, wished his colleagues and students to wish healthier and for longer, thanks to Aristotelian philosophy. The debate between Descartes' followers and supporters concerning this particular issue of Descartes' philosophy's mechanical account of the human body kept on for many years, for a decade still. And in particular, the clash was between Plemp on the one hand and the already mentioned Gerard van Goethoven, that is mostly known to us, I think, to me at least before starting the research for this paper, as I was saying before, for the illustration to the Traité de l'Homme, but who was indeed expressly defending Descartes' philosophy, and more specifically, his mechanical account of the human body. And you do indeed find that Plemp was expressly attacking is the first quotation that you might see in the handout. I'm not gonna translate it because I guess the Latin is just too beautiful. It's a passage that it's not quoted by Deschênes in his Spirits and Clocks and Life's Form, but I think nicely confirmed his reading of Descartes' philosophy and the fact that the crucial change, that Aristotelian perceived to be the case with Descartes' philosophy was this replacement of the life form of the soul with a mechanical principle. Taking stance against Gerard van Goethoven, Plemp attack Cartesians in general say natura non imitatur artem, sed ars naturam, nec possunt omnia natura opera mechanici explicari, non adducum musculi partis quem amadum nos funiculo pondo salico attraimus, nam musculi ipsi agunt vitaliter, non orologialiter. There is namely this idea that in order to account for life's operation, you need to appeal to a soul as the principle of life, rather than to a mechanical principle, such as the one of the clocks. And well, don't worry if I read in a few minutes, I'm done. What you do find especially relevant here is that indeed, these anti-Cartesians at Leuven University, led by Plemp, struggled for many, many years to have Descartes' philosophy condemned. But and indeed, Descartes' philosophy was condemned in 62. But what they came to have was a kind of a different thing than what they were expected for. Namely, they were raising their complaints to the Papal Internuncio in Brussels, and upon reading Descartes' works, what the Papal Internuncio came up with was a condemnation of 5 different points of Descartes' philosophy. And you do find all of them indeed defending in Descartes' works: the definition of substance, the rejection of substantial forms, the claim that bodies are nothing but res extensa, the extension of the universe as indefinite one, and the rejection of multiple words. And this is pretty much the story that it's usually told. The condemnation of Descartes' philosophy in Catholic places and so forth had to do with his metaphysics, first of all. I think that if you take into account what was going on there, you find that the real actors, so people like Plemp and Formont, thought that they had to attack Descartes' philosophy on different grounds. This condemnation, as I say, was written in 62, and 2 years after that, Plemp republishes Fundamenta Medicinæ, I guess with the only intent to have this condemnation in print so as to weaken the Cartesian front. But I guess at the same time, Plemp wanted to make clear as a medical professor that the first reasons to oppose Descartes' philosophy weren't coming from metaphysics, but from the medical tradition specifically. And I close with this slide, which are Plemp's list of accusations against Descartes. It's a list almost worthy of Borges, I think, and it's the Plemp last public statement in a war of nerves that had been wearing him out for over 30 years. The philosophy of Descartes' philosophy cannot be upheld by a Catholic. Many arguments and experiences prove that beasts are endowed with cognition. The arguments to the contrary can be solved. Descartes ignored the constitution, the matter of saliva. The existence of valves in the nerves is an invention. The pineal gland isn't the seat of the soul, nor the organ of the common sense. The intestine is way more nobler than the pineal gland. Insisting on his principles, Descartes killed himself in Stockholm. His arrogance was striking. What I've tried to present in this story, and I tried to show that the amount of time was unfortunately maybe insufficient, wasn't maybe too much in this talk, was to try to see that even Descartes' condemnation, even in stronghold of Catholic orthodoxy, such as them, wasn't so much a matter of theology or a matter of metaphysics proper, but was indeed considered to be based and mostly focused on Descartes' mechanical account of the living processes and on his neurophysiology more in detail. Many thanks for your attention.